1 o'clock. If you want to take over the screen, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, go for it.
I will share the screen now.
Awesome. And go ahead and get started when you're ready.
I'm ready. Oh. Hello, this is Steve Swenson. Welcome to the Yosemite Big Walls program. I'm going to talk a little bit about some old stuff and sort of new. Big wall climbing is hard to keep up on. It's changing all the time, but you'll see what I mean here in a minute. Before we get into the program, I want to talk a little bit about some Zoom guidelines for everyone and the Mountaineers who's sponsoring tonight's program. Then I'm going to tell some stories about these older climbs that we did on El Capitan about 40 years ago. Not too many tech tips or, things that are 40 years old are all mostly obsolete now. But then there's some newer climbs I did in the 90s where I'll talk a little bit about a few tips there for those of you here. With the beta and brews format, we kind of, it's kind of a little bit of a learning opportunity for everyone as well. And then some questions and answers after that. So the Zoom conferencing guidelines for everyone, everyone's been muted, so please stay muted. And please turn off your video share. This program is being recorded for future sharing and use. And if you have any questions, at the bottom of your screen, there's a little button that says chat. You can push the chat button and type in a question. And Tom Vogel, who's the CEO of the Mountaineers, Tom will be the moderator for the questions, and he will be sorting through the questions and asking those of me at the end of the program as time permits. And then please send us feedback at the end of the event to let us know what you think and what you liked or what you thought could be improved. A little bit about the Mountaineers. They were founded in 1906, over 14,000 members. They have 7 branches in the Puget Sound Basin. And Mountaineers Books, if you don't live in the Puget Sound Basin, Mountaineers Books, who most of you probably have a book on your bookshelf from Mountaineers Books. They're a wholly owned subsidiary of the Mountaineers. The Mountaineers is a 501c3 organization, and where people can make donations to support their efforts. Right now, all of their courses have been closed because of the COVID-19 crisis, but they're, conservation, advocacy, publications, and online video education is still continuing. Let's see here. Oh, here we go. When I was a teenager in the 1960s, and early 70s, it was right about the time of the golden age of climbing in Yosemite, and all my heroes were people like Tom Frost and Robbins and Yvonne Chenard and Warren Harding, and I really wanted to go big wall climbing on El Cap. By the time I was in my late teens, early 20s, I really became pretty obsessed with wanting to climb the Salathe wall on El Cap. The first ascent was done by Robbins, Tom Frost, and Chuck Pratt in 1961. I made my first attempt on the Salathe wall in 1975 with Dave Seaman, but it was too hot, and we retreated about a third of the way up from the Hollow Lake Ledge. In 1976, I made another attempt with my friend Bruce Bloom, but I took a short leader fall right above Hollow ledge and sprained my ankle. And so we retreated from just about the same place. In the spring of 1977, I was with a partner who fell and got wedged down inside the hollow flake. And I'm going to start the story with that. And in 1977, I was able to successfully climb the route with Todd Bibler and Jim Nelson. This was what I looked like in when I was 20. I was at, what, 1974, I was 20. So I was 21 in this picture. And my hair there looks a little bit about like my, my Corona haircut that I have now. And you might notice in a lot of these older photos, the equipment that we were using, old oval carabiners and fat ropes and old rucksacks. And the style back then for rock climbers was to wear the rugby shirts, and I had an old pair of corduroy knickers. The Salathe wall on El Cap starts right about over here and climbs pretty much straight up to this feature you can see. It goes around what's called the $half dollar. Then it goes up to this area called the Mammoth Terraces. Then from there you rappel down to the bottom of this feature called the Heart. This big feature here, it looks like a big giant heart. You rappel to a ledge at the base of the Heart. And then from the Heart you climb up this crack system here, and then you do a pendulum where you swing on your rope into this feature called, whoops, I got a little ahead of myself there. You get my arrow back here. You pendulum into this feature here called the hollow flake, and then the route goes pretty much straight up the hollow flake, up and out over the head wall to the top. And it was quite a genius route for those climbers in the late 50s, early 60s to pick this out, because it really follows all the real natural features that you can climb on the southwest face of El Cap. So I'm really going to tell the story about my third attempt on the Salathe wall with Steve Gropp that we made it up to the hollow flake where Steve got stuck. This is a picture of us climbing up the early slab friction pitches to the Mammoth Terraces, and some of you might recognize some of this terrain from the film Free Solo, where Alex Honnold solos a route called Freerider, which climbs a lot of the same pitches as the Salathe wall. And although in 1970s, when I was 8 climbing this, and everyone was, we were using our gear to pull us up, whereas Alex was actually free soloing this, which is free climbing it without a rope. This is the pitch is just below the $half dollar. You can see you go up the cracks here. If I can get my arrow back. I have to be careful with not to touch. Goes up these cracks and then out through the into this chimney here and out the $half dollar to the Mammoth Terraces up there. At the Mammoth Terraces, Steve and I rappelled down to the base of the Heart ledge, base of the Heart at Heart ledge, and then climbed up to here where Steve was leading the pitch, where he made a pendulum over, and he's around the corner now. He's below me and around the corner. I can't see him. Where he is here on this picture is, he's up here. I'm sorry, yeah. Oh, yeah, he's, that's Hollow Flake Ledge. We climb up to here about, and then I lower him down. He swings over here into Hollow Flake Ledge. And what happened is he climbed part way up, about halfway up the Hollow Flake. And the Hollow Flake is like a chimney. You can get back inside, and he's facing out. And he fell, and he fell down inside and got wedged. And I'm over here, and you know, I'm trying not to bother him. He's taking a long time. But the first I hear him cursing over there, just really angry and cursing. I know, oh, he's having a hard time. But I'll leave him alone. There's nothing I can really do verbally to help him from here. Then the cursing stopped, and it turned into kind of like moaning. and a more serious sound. So I took our haul rope and I climbed up and looked over, and I could see him down in there. And he's at this point, he's almost kind of out of his mind. He had gotten quite tired and exhausted trying to get out. He's really wedged in there, and now he's just kind of back in there, thinking he's just stuck and is concerned about whether he's going to survive or not. So I went ahead and used the haul rope, and by myself, I swung over there and then climbed up, sort of free soloing. Although I had the pendulum, I had the rope on still. It went back to the pendulum point. But as I got higher, it would have been really bad to fall out of there because I would have gone swinging way back. And I was able to get up and see that he was wedged down in there pretty badly. So I climbed up on my own here to the Hollow Flake Ledge where there was an anchor, and I set up an anchor and came back down to where I could reach in from the outside and try to help him. Steve he's a really skinny guy to begin with, and he had fallen down in to where he had gotten wedged right on your hip bones on both sides. And I, first of all, set up a pulley system with a 3-to-1 advantage. A lot of you will, you've learned how to do Z pulleys, for your crevasse rescue. You'll know what that is. And I went back to the ledge and tried to pull him out with a 3-to-1 pulley and couldn't move him at all. So then I went back down, and he was so wedged in there that I needed to get some more room to work. So I cut his pants off and his harness off so that he's just wedged back in there just with his tighty whities on. And then I put a sling over his head and got it down around his hips. And I just started jerking him out and it was really painful for him because every time I pulled on him, those 2 bones on his hip would just rub right into the rock. And the problem is that if he saw me starting to pull on him, he would flex his glutes. And if his butt muscles were tight, then when I pulled on him, it wouldn't move him. He had to be relaxed. So I would fake pulling. I could see his butt muscles tighten because he knew it would hurt. And then as soon as I saw that they were relaxing, I would jerk on him to pull him out. And finally I got him loose. It just took hours. And once he was loose, I fabricated a harness for him out of webbing. And then he was able to Jumar up the rope onto Hollow Flake Ledge. But I had to laugh because looking over the edge where he was jugging up the wall, I think I'm going to go, this is a picture of us rappelling down. I'm going to go to this picture here. This is him up on Hollow Flake Ledge. He was jugging up the rope with his pants still down at his ankles and with his, kind of bloody tighty whities there, and was able to get up to the ledge. We spent the night there, and then we rappelled off in the morning, and I think he just threw the pants away, and he walked back to Camp 4 in his bloody underwear. The thing that was so impressive to me about Steve was that he was spending the spring in Yosemite that year, and about a month later, he soloed the dihedral wall in El Cap. A few years, the next spring, my friends Todd Bibler and Jim Nelson were going to go try to climb the Salathe wall, and I'm like, oh man, I've tried this 3 times already, and can I go with you guys, because I really want to do this? And they said, oh yeah, sure. So we were able to get up past the Hollow Flake where I'd been a couple of times, and all the way up to the ear and El Cap Spire, and we got up onto the head wall, and well, let me, let's see here. Well, this is just some of the pitches lower down. And this is getting up to El Cap Spire. And just a classic photo of the top of the spire where we spent the night. And you can see hanging from my rack is an old bonbon. This is in 1977, so this was before cams. There's no such thing as Friends or Camelots. Those hadn't been invented yet. And if you got into wider cracks in your 8 climbing, we were using these white pitons that were called bonbons that you would hammer into the crack, and you can see one of them hanging from my rack there. The real spectacular pitch and what ended up to be the crux climbing pitches for people who wanted to free climb the Salathe wall later is the head wall. So either Todd or I can't remember, led the head wall pitch, and then the other of us, Jumar, jugged up the rope and cleaned it. But Jim wanted to jug up the rope with the rope hanging free in space. He didn't want, one of us to leave the rope going to the third climber clipped through some of the gear. So because he wanted to experience what he had read about in the first ascent, that the third person climbing up rode the haul bag. And so Todd and I were up at the belay, and we anchored off the rope and said to Jim, okay, go ahead. And he cut himself loose, and we could look down the head wall, over 2,000 feet to the valley floor. And Jim just comes shooting out from under the wall like a rocket, just much faster, I'm sure, than he thought he would. And then he came out quite far. And then when he swung back in, we thought that for sure he was going to hit the wall, but he missed it by, he said, just by inches, and had quite the Jumar up the rope to the belay, swinging back and forth like that. We reached the top a couple of days later, and when we got to the summit, or the top of El Cap, we were quite thirsty. On these big walls, you have to haul all your own water, and it's hard to bring as much water as you'd really like to drink. In the kind of warm weather you can have down in that part of California. Jim and I got to the top, and a lot of times climbers from before us would leave, like if they had any jugs of water, they'd leave them there for somebody coming behind. And we found 2 jugs of water. We found one that was all dirty and full of dead bees and insects, and another one that was fresh water with the lid on it. And when Todd came up, we handed him the jug that was full of dead insects and said, here you go. If you're thirsty, go ahead. We already drank a bunch of it. And Todd started to drink, and then we said, no, stop. We actually have some good water here for you that we shared with him. The other climb that I'm going to talk a little bit about that we did in the 70s was a climb called the Shield. It was first climbed by Garrett Bocard and Charlie Porter in 1972. And by 1978, when Don Fredericks and I climbed it, it really had very few ascents. I'm guessing it had probably less than 10 ascents by that time. Here I am I was 24 in 1978, and showing off my my Corona hairdo again here. The Shield, if I can get the arrow back here, the Shield follows the same route as the Salathe wall up here and around the $half back up to the Mammoth Terraces, but instead of going left to the base of the heart, let me see, I lost my, there it is back. It follows another route up what's called the triple direct, which takes you up here, and the triple direct, if you kept following it, would go up the mirror wall, which goes up this dihedral to the left of the nose. But instead of going up the mirror wall, it gets on this big shield that's named after this big overhanging and broad shield-like feature on El Cap. And right, it's incredibly spectacular. Out here in the middle of this shield here, there's this thing called the Triple Cracks. That's certainly on one of the most spectacular places I've ever been on a big wall, and it's led to its subsequent popularity. Again, you know, this is pictures of Don and I. Don has the striped pants here. Now, I guess maybe that was the style then, or it was just Don. Maybe Don was quite frugal. He probably had those pants, you know, for you know, maybe it was one of the 2 or 3 pairs of pants that he owned. And in the picture here, you can see that this is the shield up here. This big monolithic feature of rock that sticks out over everything. It's quite spectacular. To get up onto the shield, you know, again, this was in the 70s. This was all pounding piton. This was all piton work. Like I said, we didn't have cams. Really, we were using stoppers and a few nuts. But back in those days, these kinds of using pitons on, this was a big expanding crack. So when you pounded, if I get the arrow back, let's say if you're standing on this piton and you're pounding in this piton here, it's causing this crack to expand, which could cause the piton that you're standing on to fall out. And so what you'd do is you would get this piton started, then you would clip on the hero loop to it and clip the rope to it, so that then when you drive this piton the rest of the way, if it caused this piton to fall out with you on it, you would get caught by the piton that you were pounding in. And that really never, all the pitons here seem like they're still in place, so I don't think that really ever happened to me. But that was a pretty common technique back then when you were using pitons to aid cracks that were expanding. After we climbed up over this overhang that led up onto the shield, this is the picture of the triple cracks on the shield. The triple cracks are knife blade cracks, and when I climbed it, they were still, you could still pound knife blades into it, but the pitons actually wear out the rock, and so that after repeated piton placements, now I hear that there's kind of piton holes in this crack, and people are using sawed-off angles to pound into the crack, which I think would probably make it actually more difficult aid climbing. And this gives you an idea how overhanging it is. The whole thing's, you know, you can see the haul bag hanging in space as I think that might be me jugging the triple cracks there, or one of the pitches on the triple cracks, and you're just hanging over the entire lower part of El Cap. You can see down here, this is the $50, and this is the Mammoth Terraces, and this is the bottom of the Heart, and this part of El Cap is much lower angle than what we're on. I thought I'd just show a little bit about what our modern equipment at the time looked like. You know, this was just an old canvas bag that we used for a haul bag, and looking at the photo here now, I'm kind of surprised that we didn't wear it out and that the bottom didn't fall out of it, because it looks like it's all worn out there, and I would be kind of concerned about that now. And this was before portaledges, so you know, we would sleep in hammocks, and the hammocks were a lot lighter than portaledges, but they were a lot more uncomfortable, because when you were hanging from the hammock, your body would press your shoulder into the rock, and it was quite uncomfortable, and it was hard to sleep. I remember it being quite windy and cold. You know, some of these climbs on El Cap, you can just bake, and then sometimes it can be quite windy, cold, and you know, people have died from hypothermia on El Cap in really bad conditions. This is a picture of dawn after we got to the top, walking off towards the descent down the east ledges. I took kind of a break from big wall climbing in the 80s. I was doing other things, mostly climbing in South Asia, and really more alpine climbing. But I got into it again in the 90s and did a few more routes that would be more along the routes, be kind of more like modern aid climbing routes rather than the old classics. And so in 1997, I went and did a route over on the right-hand side of El Cap called Lost in America, which was one of the first, you know, A4 plus kind of aid climbs that I'd done. And I went and I did this climb with Alex Lowe, who had a lot more experience at modern aid climbing than I did, and I learned a lot. This part, Lost in America, is like over in here. So it's shorter, but this part of the wall is pretty overhanging, most of it. So Alex here has this huge rack of gear. You know, modern aid climbing. You've got so much stuff that you're carrying, because you need to have all these little tricks. You need to just have the right gadget for the crack. And so for this kind of climb, a little more of a modern climb, I can talk a little bit more about you know, some of the techniques. All of the hard aid climbing pitches, aid climbing pitches on Lost in America was hooking. When you get to a place where you can't place a piton or a cam, you know, we had cams now in the 90s, and you get a place where you can just hook, you know, one of these metal hooks over an edge. That's what these hard pitches were. And what made them scary is oftentimes you did a bunch of hard hooking moves in a row, and the hooks don't really act very well as protection. So it could run out. The thing I learned, you know, from Alex is that for, you know, hard aid climbing, where you're doing a lot of hooking, you need a bunch of different size hooks. All I was really familiar with going into that was the classic black diamond cliffhanger. But really, you need to have a whole rack of different size hooks, like a hawk, which is a cliffhanger that's filed to a point, or a couple of talons, and then larger hooks. What I mean by that is, like in this picture on the right here, this is the classic black diamond cliffhanger. But the distance between the back and the front here, it's just like hooking on small edges. But then you can also have a talon that has 3 different size hooks. Then black diamond also makes a thing called it's called the grappling hook, I think, which you can hook behind something that's much wider. People make a thing that they call a hawk, which is if you take a cliffhanger and you follow it to a point that makes the cliffhanger into a hawk. And that shows a placement for a talon. The other thing you need is have big hooks. If you could imagine, you know, here, if you were trying to use a cliffhanger to hook off this little edge on the outside, it would be terrifying. But if you, in here, you might be able, in this example, maybe you could put pitons back in here, but let's say all you had back in here was a little divot, but you could hook all the way back into it. It could make something that was an A4 hook out here into A2 if you had a big enough hook to hook back there. So that's something that I really learned Lost in America was, from Alex was all this hard, difficult hooking. I thought that on that climb, maybe the scariest bit for me was right in the middle of the big wall. There was this pretty unprotected run out, easy 510 pitch, and after you've been at that time, well, for me, at that time, easy 510 wasn't that easy by today's standards, maybe not so much, but it was about 40-foot run out on like easy, 510 AB, and it was my pitch to lead it, and Alex was very encouraging. It was great, Alex was always super encouraging about, oh yeah, Steve, you can do that, and so I pulled the free climbing shoes out of the haul bag and just very carefully worked my way up that. Again, just as kind of typical hard aid climbing with all kinds of little weird gadgets that you have to make progress up the wall. And of course, now we have portaledges. What ended up being, and modern haul bag there, as you can see as well, what ended up to be the biggest problem for us on that route was heat, and we didn't bring enough water. And I think even to today, I would say that I maybe suffered on this climb more than any in my whole career, because I don't know if there's anything more miserable in a way than being really thirsty for day after day. And because we in the valley, it had snowed right before we got there. It seemed really cold. We brought a stove, we brought food to cook, we brought big parkas. We didn't think we needed as much water as we did, and we got up on the wall and the weather changed and it was super hot. It was in the 90s, and we just baked on it. But it's one of my real fond memories of being together with Alex on a wall like that for, I think it probably took us 4 or 5 days. Another example of a modern route that I did around that same time is a route called Space, which is over on the right, really close to the Dawn Wall that you probably heard about, that Tommy Caldwell and Kevin Jorgensen free climbed a couple of years ago. And but Space, I did that with J.J. Brooks and Frank Huster in 1998. And I was supposed to do it with Alex, but Alex dropped out because he had some work for North Face he needed to do. And he and I and JJ were going to do it together. And because Alex and I, there's an article in the Ascent magazine right now that's out on the shelves. You can go read it, that Carl Tobin wrote about how Alex and I rescued he and JJ Brooks off of a route, the big wall that they were climbing in Alaska at the time, and got hit by rockfall. But that's how we got, Alex and I got to know JJ. Whoops, I did that by accident. The Space kind of climbs up the wall, kind of in this area over here. For aid climbing, it was one of my favorite parts of El Cap because it's so steep that you're not dragging your haul bags up all these slabs like you are over here, like on the Salathe wall. This is all gently overhanging, and so the hauling is really easy because the bags just hang in space. Maybe that's why they call it Space. And again, this is Frank and JJ. Maybe what I'm going to talk a little bit about with this climb is what you'd call heading. When you have a crack that is, it's like there's like a divot or just a shallow opening, not a real crack where you could put a piton or a cam or a nut in it. If you're trying to make progress, you can smash a piece of these copperhead pieces of copper or aluminum that are swaged onto a cable. You can smash them into the crack, and they have enough holding power for your body weight, but not enough holding power really to hold a fall. So it's the hardest, most run out pitches on space were heading. And so I thought I would just talk a little bit about heading. Heading is a lot like gluing. If you're going to glue two surfaces together, the thing that you want is you want the surfaces to be clean, and you want to have as much contact. The more area of contact you have between the surfaces that you're going to glue, the stronger the glue job is. And that's kind of, I'll explain, with heads, the heads all come in different sizes. And so if you're doing an aid route like this, you'll have a bunch on your rack, like with all that stuff that Alex was carrying, you would have a bunch of heads, and you would have to pick a head, and I'll get to that, that fits the size of the crack. You also want some tools that you can use for heading. And I think the important tools are the brushes, the toothbrush and the wire brush, because you need to use the brushes to clean the crack before you try to put the head in there. Because if you've got water or slime or dirt or anything in there when you try to put the head in and hammer the head in there, the holding power of the head is going to be a lot less if you didn't clean it first. The heads come in different sizes, and the temptation that maybe all of us who've done this before is to do the example on the right, which has the exclamation mark on it, which is, don't do this, is to pick a head that's too big for the crack. You kind of have this idea that, gee, if it's a bigger piece of metal, it's going to be stronger, but that's not true. Because what happens if you try to hammer too big of a head into the groove, you only get a couple points of contact. You don't have a big area of contact between the surfaces, and it's not going to be as strong. And so that one in the middle that shows the head that it just nests in there nicely, that gives you the most contact with the groove, is the one you want to use. When you hammer the head into the groove with the pick of your hammer, first before you do that is you shape the head to the crack. So if the crack's kind of like a V, you can put the head off to the side and hammer the soft copper into the shape of a V before you even put it into the slot, so that then when you pound on it with your hammer, when it's in there, again, you're getting as much contact between the head and the seam as possible. And then at the very end, you take your little chisel and you X it to get it in there as tight as you can. So that's just a little bit of some tips there on heading, which was what most of the difficult pitches were on space. The other thing that probably one of the biggest dangers on these kind of really steep, slightly overhanging aid climbs is if you fall on something like one of those head blows, you can zipper out all the other gear that you put in. You can take really big falls. But on you can see right here, if you did, nothing would really happen to you because it's overhanging. You're way up the wall, and you just take a big scary fall out into nothing, into air. But the thing you don't want to do is hit the portaledge. That's the thing that could hurt you. So I'm down here kind of shouting at those guys to get rid of, they're overstanding on the one portaledge. I'm asking them to take the other portaledge down and get rid of it, so that if I fell, I wouldn't hit it. The last climb I'm going to talk about today, I think, is climbing the nose in a day in 2000 with Conrad. As you know, Warren Harding, Wayne Marion, George Whitmore did the first ascent of the nose in 1958, and it took them 45 days. And I think the record now for climbing the nose, I'm not going to know this exactly, but it's just a little bit over 2 hours, I think. But a reasonable goal for normal people is to try to do it in a day. And I did it in a day with Conrad in 2000. I probably just slowed him down. We did it. It took us about 18 hours. I'm sure he's done it quicker than that. But the weather wasn't very good. And so when we climbed up high here, we're up there in Pancake Flake above the Great Roof. Then it got dark on us above Camp 6. But then it got really cold and there was ice forming in the cracks. And I was really glad to be there with Conrad because he's an expert at this stuff and he got us up the rest of the wall in conditions that we didn't have very many clothes, you know, because we're doing it in a day and we're not hauling and we're trying to go fast. So trying to stay the night out in those kind of conditions would have been difficult. So we were able to get off of it, you know, kind of a little after dark. But if I was going to give any beta to the folks out there about climbing the nose in a day, it's that you practice the sequence from Sickle Ledge up into the stove leg cracks in the daylight ahead of time. If you want to climb the nose in a day, you often are starting in the dark and maybe ending in the dark, if you're like me. And so you're doing that where there's that pendulum from the end of Sickle Ledge over the stove legs in the dark. And it's really hard in the dark to see where you have to free climb up a little bit on some edges to get to the base of the stove legs. And if you don't know exactly where those are, you can waste a lot of time in the dark swinging around into the wrong place. And so that's my suggestion for all of those of you that want to try to climb the nose in a day. So now it's time for Q&A, and probably by this time, if those of you have submitted any questions, Tom, who's the CEO of the Mountaineers, has very graciously agreed to sort through them and ask me your questions.
Well, hey, Steve, thanks so much for that. So the first question, I think this is probably a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but can you tell us a little bit about what you were wearing on your feet in that first climb, and how did that compare to modern climbing shoes?
Back in the 70s, we were wearing, when we went aid climbing, we were wearing these shoes called Royal Robbins shoes. They were actually made by a French company called Galibier, and they were designed by Royal Robbins. And they were, I would say, some of you might be familiar with them, but they were these blue suede shoes that were almost kind of like a cross between a modern rock climbing shoe and a heavy mountaineering boot. They might be a little bit like, you know, modern shoes that are like 510s. That would be like a scrambling shoe that is not very good technical rock climbing shoe. If you have to scramble the odd pitch, it would be like that. It would be like a modern scrambly shoe, but without the sticky rubber.
Cool. When you were doing a Naiad with Conrad, were you swinging leads or did you do blocks?
You know, I don't really remember. I actually can't remember, so I shouldn't guess. I'm guessing it would seem logical that we would have done it in blocks, but I don't remember actually.
Maybe next time Conrad's back here, we could ask him.
Yeah, he might remember. He's younger than me. He has a better memory.
Cool. So this one's from Graham. He asks, tell us about how these climbs helped you on routes in the big mountains.
Oh, you know, I mean, you know, well, perseverance, you know, the Salathe wall, I did it on my 4th try. And also, you know, big wall climbing, can have the same element, suffering element as alpine climbing, for days in a row. And certainly the how we suffered from thirst, Alex and I did on Lost in America, definitely good training for suffering.
Cool. I don't even know what this next one means, but hopefully you will. Are bongs big enough to fit in the hollow flake or the ear?
No. I think the largest sized bong was 4 inches. So it was about the same size as the number 4 friend. So probably the person asking the question would know how big a number 4 friend is. So that's how big, that was the large. No, actually there was probably bongs on the market that maybe came out later that were as big as 6 inches. And I think you can buy friends that will go up to that. I know that Black Diamond and Wild Country have made 6-inch friends for a while. Like a number 5 or a number 6 friend.
Cool. Next question is, how different is climbing now since then, when you guys didn't have advanced climbing gear, like there is now? I mean, I guess maybe said differently, if you were attempting some of these routes now with the latest gear and lightest weight gear, how different would it be?
Well, the gear aside, one of the big differences is that there weren't very many people doing it. So if you were on El Cap in the 70s, you might be the only person on the wall. Or if there was somebody else on the wall that was a couple routes over from you, and it wasn't windy and you could yell over there, it would be somebody that you knew. So the community, now if you go down to Yosemite in the evening, it's always sort of fun to go down to El Cap Meadows and in the evening time and look up at the wall and see all the lights. And like in the prime climbing season, you might see 20 different parties on El Cap, with all their little headlights flickering up there. As far as the gear goes, there's just a lot more advancements that have been put into the kinds of gadgets that you have that will fit into weird, strange little cracks. So it makes it so that you can climb, more, for hard aid climbing, you can climb more difficult, small and weird sized things. Back in the old days, like A4 with the gear that they had, that we had in the 70s. In fact, now they A4 is not the same as what A4 is now. So actually modern climbers there would say, they make a difference between what they call modern A4 and old A4. So probably old A4 using modern gear might be A2. So if somebody tells you that it's old A4, that kind of tells you it's not too scary. But if somebody tells you that that's modern A4 plus, then you know that kind of aid climbing is terrifying. That every piece of gear that you're placing, feels like it can barely support body weight, and you're doing placement of that over and over again, until you get to a belay, which is usually bolted and you have safe belays. But to get there, you need a lot of skill at placing, making difficult placements.
I'm not sure if this is an answerable question, but this actually looks like it's from Todd. Is how come your hair looks now like it did in the 70s?
Yeah, well, I had somebody else that wrote to me and said, how come you still have so much hair? I'm losing my hair and I'm 30. You saw another friend of mine texted that to me like a minute ago. So
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know. I can't answer that.
Yeah. It's unanswerable, but yeah, you
Yeah.
just go with it.
But I appreciated that. I appreciate that.
Another question. Here's a real one. Have you climbed other places that were similar in character to climbing on El Cap?
Yeah, although I haven't done a lot of big wall climbing in the big mountains, but I have done some in Alaska. I had a few pictures of that I decided not to show because it wasn't Yosemite, but in the 90s, I attempted a big wall on this big face of the eye tooth that you see when you're flying into the Alaska range from Talkeetna. I tried it once with Alex, and I also made an attempt on it with Andy DeClerc, who was living in Seattle at the time. Now he's from South Africa and he moved back there. And we got about halfway up it with Andy, but I got hit by a piece of falling ice and broke my scapula. And that's kind of a long story, another whole story about having to retreat off of halfway up the eye tooth with a broken scapula.
A couple of sort of follow-on questions. Do you still have any big wall objectives, or are you really mostly focused on the Alpine? And then a second question along those lines is, have you climbed any notable big walls more recently than 2000, or have you been really focused on the big mountains and in the Alpine?
Well, I was just in Norway before the whole COVID-19 crisis really hit. I got back here to where I live in the winter in Canmore, Alberta. I was in early March, right before all this happened, and Conrad was there at this ice festival as well, and we were sharing a room, and we kind of tentatively agreed that we should go do a big wall together, which for me would be the first time if we can arrange to do that, would be the first time I've been on a big wall since when I climbed Space in 2000, because I really have been more focused on alpine climbing, and especially alpine climbing in the Great Ranges.
Cool. So this next, I'm not sure this is really a question, but you have to guess who asked this, okay?
Oh no.
So speaking of memory, did you say we camped on top of El Cap Spire? I thought we spent the night without a ledge, a pitch or two below. Haha, did I dream this?
Oh, I think that's true. That would either be Todd or Jim that asked that question then, because I think that's right. I forgot about that. We had, I think we didn't quite make it to El Cap Spire, and we were hanging our slings in a pitch or so below that. I think that's true. I think that's true.
Yeah, that was from Jim. Compliments to Jim to jog your memory. And there's another one here. I imagine this is from Bruce Bloom. He can chime in, but he was asking where you get your hair done. That might be compliments of the coronavirus.
Yeah. Except Bruce still has a lot of hair too. He probably started into the whole coronavirus thing with maybe having had a recent haircut, but I didn't. It was like, oh, I'll get a haircut when I get back from Norway. And when I got back from Norway, everything was closing down.
Yeah. I'll introduce you to my barber if you want.
Well, my wife Ann tells me that she thinks I should grow it long enough so that I can have a man bun.
Nice. That could be a good look.
And Graham told me he's 100% in support of that.
A couple of more serious questions. Here's a gear question for you. Pitons clearly damaged rock, but doesn't placing copperheads or the tools to set them also cause scarring?
I think so. You know, what often happens on big walls is that the copperheads end up being sort of semi-permanent. You know, first ascensionists or subsequent ascensionists, if they, you know, they put them in and they leave them. And so in some ways, like climbing something, a route like Space that had been done before, where a lot of the heads were existing, you know, you're clipping other people's heads, and which in some ways is a little more terrifying than placing your own heads, because you didn't actually know what the process was to clean it and do all those steps like I went through. So you're not placing them and removing them like you do pitons, and so it doesn't do much damage to the rock in that regard.
Cool. Here's one that's kind of more of an existential one. So put your thinking cap on for this. Do you consider yourself a rock climber or an alpine climber, and why?
Oh, I would consider myself an alpine climber. I have a lot more time spent doing that. You know, growing up as a climber, most of my, you know, I never really did the kind of live in your van, and I kind of went straight from college into my profession as a consulting engineer. And so, you know, when I had, you know, the kinds of blocks of time that I had off to go climbing, I almost always went on expeditions or alpine climbing. And my rock climbing that I did was, you know, the weekends and shorter periods of time in between, when I could get a week away here and there to go to the desert, or, you know, to do a big wall, or to, you know, just go, you know, weekend rock climbing at the crags around Seattle. So just by, you know, my interest and passion really is more the mountains and the big mountains than just pure rock climbing, although I really, really enjoy going rock climbing. And now that I'm retired, I probably do a lot more rock climbing, maybe even than alpine climbing, if you count up the number of days. But you know, it's not something that I would be known for. My level of expertise as a rock climber is not that great compared to, I think, maybe what I've been able to achieve as an alpine climber.
Here's another question. Do you feel more comfortable on Northwest alpine climbs or rock? And do the expeditions push you the most to your limits?
Well, I don't know. You know, I'm not sure that I can really answer about the Northwest alpine or rock question, so much as that I think that, you know, different areas, you know, present different challenges. You know, my interest, I think, you know, when I first started climbing as a teenager, was my goals were really to try to go climb in the big mountains. And I learned a tremendous amount from starting climbing in the Cascades when I was young. And then kind of the next progression for me was climbing in the Canadian Rockies, and then in Alaska, and then to South Asia. But I think, you know, so if, you know, there's great rock climbs to do, to learn, and amazing places to go in the Pacific Northwest. But then, you know, there's bigger, you know, and, you know, more substantial places, you know, for multi-pitch rock climbing, and even, you know, sport cragging, you know, in other places in the world. You know, probably the longest, most difficult, you know, granite climbs are places like Yosemite or Squamish, or, you know, or big walls in the Patagonia and in Pakistan. Probably some of the hardest sport climbing is in Europe. You know, so there's different places in the world you can go to work on your different skills, but to some degree, all those same skills, can be found in different places in the Pacific Northwest.
Another question is, did you ever climb with Dr. Robert Schuyler?
No.
No.
No. Rob Schuyler, I know, was the doctor on. That's the same person. If he was the doctor that was on this American 78 K2 expedition. No, we never had an opportunity to climb with each other. He did. He passed away a few years ago, but he did do a hernia operation on my youngest son when he was really small.
Okay, so at least had a connection to.
Just happened to be him, So I have met him and we've spoken, but I never had an opportunity to climb with him.
Another gear question: how long did it take you to clean, place, and test the copperheads?
Oh, I'm not sure. Every placement probably can take a bit of time. Maybe a best way for me to answer that is that, a hard A4 plus pitch on a big wall like that can take you most of the day. So, you may only climb 1 or 2 pitches a day on some of these really hard A climbs.
What advice for somebody that's maybe a decent rock climber now, but was wanting to get into to doing Aden Big Wall? What advice would you have for them to make that transition?
I'd go climbing more. It's just it's like you can go out to your local crag where there's a place where you can practice aid climbing where people don't go free climbing. But what I would suggest to someone would be just go to Yosemite and go start climbing on some of the shorter, easier aid climbs right off the bat. If you'll learn how to do it by doing it, and even if you get up a couple of pitches and you have all these problems and all your ropes get tangled and you didn't bring the right stuff, you can rappel down and come back a couple of days later with the right stuff, and then you learn from your mistakes, and then you gradually get to the point where you have enough knowledge and expertise to do bigger things just by practicing.
Did you climb any winter alpine routes in Canada where you needed to use similar style aid as you did in Yosemite?
No. That sounds miserable. But I'm sure people who do that sort of thing. I have tremendous admiration for them.
How many days did the A4 and the A4 Plus El Cap routes take you guys?
Those routes, actually, we spent 9 days on Space, which is a full length. It's like a 30-some pitch climb. But 2 of those days we were just stuck in a storm, so we sat in the portaledge doing nothing for 2 days. But it took us 7 days of climbing days.
Well, that kind of leads to another one. Beside water, what's your favorite beverage after a climb?
Oh gosh, anything. Coming down off of climbs like that where you get really dehydrated. I never drink soft drinks, but I'll really like having a Coke, after something like that to start with. And then after you get a little more rehydrated, and some food, beer is always nice, but I wouldn't start with that because I would be flat on the ground if I'd started with that.
I guess anything without bees and bugs in it is probably pretty good, right?
Yeah, pretty good with yeah, filtering those with your teeth is not enjoyable.
Here's another kind of broad question. What do you personally feel is your biggest climbing accomplishment?
You know, I don't think that I would be able to point to a single climb as being my most significant accomplishment. I mean, I think that you know, trying to be as safe as you can so that you can climb at a high level and still be an old man like I am now is a pretty good accomplishment. And taking care of yourself, eat well and do all your physical therapy and stay fit, so that as you get older that you can still be active. Those are all, I think significant accomplishments, for me. I mean, I'm 66 now, and last year, we did a world-class climb on an unclimbed 7,000 meter peak in Pakistan. So, maybe those kinds of accomplishments have less to do with, doing a particular thing as opposed to just, trying to maintain a lifestyle, where you can, just stay active and stay busy, with something that you feel passionate about, and not get discouraged by the little setbacks that you have with your health or your there's times with your employment or with your family where you're away from it for a year or two. You can always come back to it, if you kind of just sort of maintain your vision, and enthusiasm for the mountains. It's, maybe my most significant accomplishment has just been able to stay, with it for as long as I have.
Great answer. Yeah. Several comments that really appreciate that perspective, Steve. Hey, here's one from your son, Jed. Hey, Dad, great job on the presentation and even better hair. Which climb on El Cap would you say is the most challenging? And would it be different looking at it from a physical versus mental aspect?
I'm sorry, say that. What's the question again?
The question is, which climb on El Cap would you say is the most challenging? And then would it be different looking at it from a physical versus mental aspect?
Well, that's a really good question. Probably that first climb on the Salathe wall was the most challenging. I mean, it wasn't until my fourth try on it. Like the answer to one of the previous questions, it was probably the steepest learning curve. And it was just sort of the willingness to come back, over and over again, take the things that you learned from your previous mistakes and correct those and apply them again. Those can be some of the most rewarding experiences, even though probably the Salathe wall, compared to all the other climbs I talked about tonight, was the easiest climb, technically. But it was probably the biggest challenge. And the second part of the question, it had to do with kind of mental or physical. Well, obviously, climbing or any athletic activity like this is, you need to do the training for it to be in shape to be able to do it. But, I think especially any kind of long multi-day routes, for us, the Salathe wall in those days was pretty committing, because once you did the pendulums, over into Hollow Flake Ledge, it's a little bit hard to get down, especially back then, because there was just sort of less gear all over the place and bolted stations and things like that for getting down. So it felt like us at that time, that we're kind of launching off into the unknown quite a bit more than if you start up routes on El Cap today. So, you know, I think with climbing in general, no matter what kind of climbing it is, that the mental side of it is, you know, maybe the biggest challenge, you know, to motivate yourself to do it, to stay disciplined with your training. And then when you get frightened and a little bit intimidated by what you're launching into, to, you know, have the confidence in yourself to say, hey, you know, I just need to start up this thing and take it, you know, one little bit at a time. And you know, if I'm careful and use everything that I know as I go along, you know, we'll be okay.
Do maybe just a few more questions, Steve. Another question about the specific Yosemite climbs you talked about tonight. Was there one in particular that was most satisfying or more satisfying than the others?
I think I'll just say, you know, that just go back to the answer to the previous question of why the things I said about the Salathe wall.
Yeah. How long did you balance being a professional engineer and a climber, and specifically, how did you maintain that balance?
Well, I had a career as a consulting engineer for 35 years, and between that and climbing and, you know, my family, I wouldn't call it as a balance so much as a juggling act. And I mean, to me, it always, you know, you were all, you know, you have to be good at time management, and you know, you have to have a good sense of you know, kind of what level of commitment that you can reasonably make to any of the things that you're doing at the same time, so that you don't put yourself in a position where people are counting on you for something, and there's just no way that you can. It's going to be impossible for you to kind of deliver at a level that you would feel good about. So you know, just kind of managing kind of level of your commitment to all the things that you're doing. To, you know, you're going to be busy and you're going to be trying to doing a lot of things at once, but, you know, be realistic. You know, with a lot of these things, if you want to do climbs like, you know, things that I've, you know, been able to do in places like South Asia, those kinds of climbs take money and resources. So whatever you're doing in the rest of your life, you need to be able to make some money. I mean, you're not going to be able to do that kind of climbing if you're living out of your van very easily. Yeah, it's, you know, just kind of energy and enthusiasm and dedication and persistence and not getting into a fall over your head. Those are all things that, you know, are kind of part of that juggling act.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of getting in over your head, is another question is, do you have any memorable near misses that hold any particularly useful lessons that others could learn from?
I'm trying to think here. Well, you know, probably one of my most memorable near misses was a long time ago on Mount Rainier with Bruce Bloom, who might be listening here. He and I were trying to climb, this would have been in the early 70s, maybe. We were trying to climb Ptarmigan Ridge on Rainier, and there's a section where you traverse out and you're on some ice. It was like some mixed climbing and not very good protection, and you're traversing out over a big cliff below. So like you've got like 600 feet of a kind of a wall below you. And I was crossing one leg inside the other as I was traversing, and I caught my crampon on my gaiter, and I fell over backwards and went tumbling down with, I don't think I had any gear in between Bruce and me. And I just figured that I was going to pull Bruce off and that we were both going to go tumble to the bottom of the wall. and the rope snagged on a piece of rock that was protruding from the ice. And as it slid over this piece of volcanic rock, there was some ice that had kind of melted, hard ice that had melted away from the rock. And the rope, as it slid through, got pinched between the ice and the rock and stopped the fall. And I think that was probably as close to, a fatal accident as I've ever had. I think the lesson for me there was, well, one was don't fall when you're in a situation like that. Maybe we shouldn't really have even been roped together. Maybe the greatest lesson I learned out of that was humility. You really have to approach the mountains and what we're doing in here with a lot of humility around, these very spectacular but unforgiving landscapes, that we like to visit, up high. And I think that's what I learned. I went away from that, severely chastened, and it made me be a lot more careful.
Yeah, Bruce is with us tonight, and and his comment is that he remembers.
I'm sure he does, because he probably feels the same way about that being a close call.
Yeah, I'm glad that rock held.
Me too.
Maybe the last question is that your neighbor Audrey is curious if that's the three sisters on the wall behind you in that picture.
Yeah, it is. Tell Audrey that that's a painting of the three sisters that Anne got in an auction for the Alpine Club of Canada, and we live up here in some townhouses, and Audrey and Michelle and Gunnar live a couple doors down from us. Yeah, Audrey just asked a question about the painting.
That's Anne in the background there. Well, Steve, this has been terrific. I think we'll probably draw it to a close here, but thanks so much for making the time to share some of your earlier climbs and some escapades down in Yosemite. I know we were all really looking forward to being together on April 8th to hear about your successful summit, your first summit of or the first ascent of Link Sar, and I think we're getting that rescheduled for later in the summer or in the fall, hopefully, when we can
I think I'm doing a program at for the Mountaineers at the Program Center on October 13th on Link Sar.
October 13th. Cool.
Yeah.
We're really looking forward to that. But anyway, thanks for tonight, and thanks for everything that you do for the Mountaineers and mentoring younger climbers, and we really appreciate it. So
thanks, Tom. And I'll just close that just to talk about the Mountaineers a little bit, that they have many free and low-cost resources to and for us to stay connected to each other in the outdoors. I think for those that are watching tonight, while we're all kind of sequestered here and we can't get out and take advantage of some of the outdoor educational opportunities the Mountaineers offers, they've opened a virtual education center and virtual events calendar for more events like this. And if you want to support the organization, certainly you can go to their website to donate. And here's just a screenshot of their brand new virtual education center. So if you want to go check that out to learn some skills, check out their webpage. And thanks a lot, everyone, for tonight for joining. And this has been great. And give some feedback. This is the first time I've ever done this. So be interested in what everybody thinks. So good night and hope to everybody stay safe and healthy.
Thanks a bunch, Steve. Have a great night.
You too.